Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is Listening Beyond the Soundbites. Ben Kinsley is here, our co-producer and co-host. Ben, how are you?
Good.
Good, welcome. And our special guest is Representative Heidi Scheuermann. Heidi, how are you?
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Heidi is from Stowe. It's just Stowe?
Just Stowe.
Oh, that's
right.
cool. That makes it. I love the legislators who rattle off like 10 towns and they
That's
never
right.
get it wrong. I don't know how they do that.
From the Northeast Kingdom? Or-
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
exactly.
So could you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I was born and raised in Stowe, went away to college, and then was in the Peace Corps for a few years,
I
served in the
remember
Peace
that.
Corps.
Yeah.
And upon my return, I went to work for Senator Jim Jeffords in Washington, and that was sort of my start in the political sphere, and began working for him, was able to get back up here when he ran for re-election, and was excited to get back up to Vermont and have the opportunity to do that, and then stayed. I took a little sabbatical from Jim for a couple of years doing things, and then I returned to his office until his
Excellent.
retirement. And upon his retirement, it was the same year, that same year, the member from Stowe in the Vermont House of Representatives was also retiring. So it was sort of fortuitous, and I decided to run for the seat then.
Very
So I'm
nice.
I'm finishing up my 6th term in the House now.
That's great. And you have your own small business that you run in Stowe.
I do. I have a property management
Right.
development company, so I manage long-term rentals,
Great.
mostly residential, multifamily rentals, and I have one commercial space right now, but
Good for you.
trying to work on that and expand a little bit in that.
That's
So,
great.
yep.
This is a whole different ballgame when you get into
It is.
commercial.
It is.
You and Rick Hubie must have had a few
yeah.
things to talk about. That was Rick did that too, didn't
Yeah,
he,
Rick did a
Representative?
little bit more. His was more vacation, I think,
Oh,
owners,
really?
things
Second
like
homes?
that.
Oh.
When at least what I knew of his business. So
Awesome.
that's a special gig
Oh, really?
that I haven't quite gotten into yet.
Oh, okay.
I'm more of the long-term kind of
okay.
residential. We own much of the two of the properties are Section 8, are low-income
Oh,
housing,
okay. Ah,
and
oh, that's
elderly.
cool.
One of them is elderly. So so that takes a lot of different kind of
Yep.
work,
Yeah.
federal paperwork and what have
Oh,
you. So
ugh.
yeah, lots
Never
of
mind
that.
that.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to update our viewers on where we are. It's Monday, May 21st, just if you're paying attention to what happened in the legislature. They gavelled out, when did they gavel out?
week ago
A week ago
Saturday.
Saturday.
Yep.
And now where are we? What's happening?
So as was clear at the time of our adjournment, the governor Governor Phil Scott was not supportive of a number of the bills that were going to pass, and two of those bills are actually must-pass bills. In order for government to run, and school budgets to be paid for, both of those bills, the budget and the tax bill, must be passed. So they're must-pass bills. Even though we knew they were going to be most likely vetoed, the legislature decided to adjourn sine die, which means the session is over.
Right.
So the governor was required to call us in for a special session. This is relatively unusual in my time. Usually we adjourn with a veto, the potential of a veto in mind. So we adjourn to us, and we would be come back in for a veto session. But this special sessions, it's really hard to really understand how they work. But what I can tell you is that they're called by the governor, and he has done that for us to come back in on Wednesday. But special sessions are not limited in scope,
Right.
which means we can deal with anything that the legislative leaders decide they'd like to deal with, including other bills that may have been vetoed, other bills that may not have crossed the finish line in general, but they wanted to do and vetoes, and nor is it limited in time. So we're going to come back Wednesday. From what I understand from the speaker, she is going to then have us leave and have committees do some work for over the next week, and then we'll return next Wednesday, the 30th, and she estimates 30th, 31st, and 1st at this time. But again, this is all sort of new. It's not that common, so I think we're all sort of
Yeah, waiting
trying
to see.
waiting to see.
Yeah, because
exactly.
I'm just a little worried about the open door to anything
Yeah, and
goes.
certainly it can't be the actual bills that we worked on this past, because the session, the 2017-18 session
it.
biennium is actually closed, but the language that was being worked on in the can
Oh,
be
so it-
reintroduced as another bill.
Oh, I
So it'd
didn't
be
even know
like
that.
in the House, it'd be like H1. Would be the-
Exactly,
yeah.
something along
It's
those
just
lines.
it just restarts. It's
If
like a whole new.
if that's what they want. I mean, right now, again, I don't know if they're going to go through those. I don't know if they're going to do votes to override or sustain the governor's vetoes on certain things. I don't. As we were talking earlier, I haven't even received word that the governor has actually vetoed the two must-pass
haven't heard
bills
that
yet.
either,
So.
yeah.
So I don't know if that would be on the agenda for Wednesday or not, or
Where
the
does the
following week.
negotiations happen? I know that the Senate Pro Tem would like all the negotiations to be done.
Yeah,
That may not happen, I'm
in
thinking.
public. So, yeah, no, it's, for transparency purposes, you like to make sure that the legislature is open and transparent. And I think in many ways we are throughout the session. We have public committee
of course
meetings
you
and
do,
what have you. But I will say a lot of decisions are made, and a lot of strategy, obviously, is done behind closed doors. And that is still happening. That has happened, I think, probably when you were there.
Right,
I mean,
sure.
I know when you were there, and
Yeah.
certainly when you were in the administration, those things happen. I think in some cases, especially in this particular case, when we really are at a stalemate, in order for people to really lay the cards on the table, I suspect doing that in behind closed doors with just the speaker and the president pro tem
Right.
of the Senate and the governor, that might be the most efficient way to do things. That said, I don't like, and I know Ben knows this about me. I'm very cautious about things that come forward that are quickly
Well, like
done,
that you haven't read?
and that we haven't read. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Like here's the bill. Vote
Yeah,
on
right,
it.
yeah.
yeah,
We've had that happen
so,
more than once.
So we, the Republicans in the House have made a conscious effort over the last number of years to basically say we need a minimum number of 24 hours for bills. We don't, all of that kind of thing, so that we are able to really comprehend what's in the bills. And understand them.
Well, in the budget,
to
you almost
extent that we
need more time than 24 hours
the
to
budget.
digest that.
So really, the key to the budget, it seems to me right now, at least in this particular case, is the $30 million
Right.
that the legislature is using for a pension buy down. That's one-time monies that are coming in, and they're and so that's what the legislature decided to use. The governor. The reason the stalemate is happening is because the governor would like to use that money to buy down the property tax rate increase that's going to happen as a
Right.
result of school budgets. So that's kind of where we're at. Aside from that, that particular issue in the budget, I don't, there's not a lot of, I mean, certainly I think many of us would have chosen to do certain things differently, but all in all, it was a good budget in my
right,
view. I think, and
the overall increase was
the
pretty
overall
minimal,
increase was
wasn't it?
about 1%
Yeah,
in
really.
spending, and that's
Right.
the second year. I will say, and I give kudos to the governor for this, and kudos actually to the speaker who followed, who took him up on his
Right.
demand that when he started, he said, we need a budget that won't increase or institute new taxes or fees.
Right.
And we did that last year, and we did that again this year. The governor, obviously right now, I'm sorry, I'm babbling,
okay.
but the governor right now, the issue is the property tax increases. But again, those are bills that the people of Vermont have given to us. They voted on these spending increases
Right.
for education, so they're giving us a bill. This isn't a tax that we
Yeah.
increased. So
Well-
that said, that's sort of that's the stalemate right now. The
Right.
governor is really adamant that he doesn't want those tax rates to go up, and so he wants to do what he can to ensure it doesn't happen. But
And it seems like on that issue in particular, there's really a philosophical difference of approach between where the legislature is at and where the governor's at. And it's an interesting evolution. People have been talking about this for years, where Act 60 is going to turn into a state, for lack of a better term, the terminology people usually use is monopoly over the education
Yeah.
fund, right, over education in Vermont. And people have been predicting that basically since Act 60 passed. I mean, now, and we created a state education fund. And the governor and the administration seem to be looking at it as, like, the state is responsible for managing the fund, even if the appropriations for the fund are coming from the local level.
Well, so yes, they're coming from the locals because it's property taxes that the locals are paying, but the state has to actually raise the money.
Right,
Right.
the state
Yeah.
has to raise the
That's
money.
Based on their vote.
Right.
And so it's an interesting kind of, I think they're approaching the issue differently. The administration's saying, look, at the end of the day, this is state money because the state has to administer this education fund. We have to raise the money for it. But the legislature is looking at it as, these are locally voted taxes, and we don't have control over the spending side of the equation. You just have the control over the raising the money side of the equation.
But do you honestly
Yeah.
think, because people keep yelling lower taxes, do they really understand that they've set the rate? Collectively, the people. I mean,
think
I don't
that's-
think they know that.
We've had this discussion. I mean, I know I've been doing this for 12 years, and I will say that is precisely what you just brought up and what Ben and just brought up is precisely the problem with the
Right.
education funding system. You have this arm voting for the spending,
Yeah.
and you have this arm that has to raise
Raise
the
money.
money. And it just doesn't work. So
Right.
yes, in a sense, when you go in to vote on your budget, you don't know necessarily if your taxes are going to go up. In fact, a lot of times, as we know, districts have voted to decrease their budgets,
It still
and
goes
yet
up.
their property
Their
taxes go
spending
up.
still goes,
But it's
yeah.
because of the statewide spending. So I guess my whole view is I have always argued that I'd like to bring it more back to the locals. Not everything, not like it was before Brigham, but something so that there's more connection.
Right.
Without that connection to the
agree with
raising
you.
of the money, and this is where the philosophical difference is, if the state wants to control state property taxes, then somebody is going to have to propose, and this is not going to be me, but somebody is going to have to propose that we basically set a statewide
Right.
per pupil
There
spending.
you go.
So you get $17,000 a year per pupil, and that's all you can spend, and then the school boards can determine how that money is going to be spent, not how much it's spent.
Or-
And that would be very difficult.
Or you
but-
could adopt the Hawaii model of one school district
Or
for
one
the
school
entire
district.
There you
state.
go.
Do that.
Yeah.
But I think that's the ultimate question: is do we want the state to? And in my view, in many ways, the state has taken over a great deal of our education, but there is still this local
Yep.
local
they
ability
really
to
don't
impact
understand.
the actual budget.
Yeah.
And that is the challenge.
Where I
It's a
s-
huge challenge.
Yeah,
But
right.
I will say, until we deal with the education funding system, I don't think until we reconnect people. It's either the state does, a certain per equalized pupil
Right.
spending, and that's it, or we have to reconnect voters to the budgets that they vote on and school
Yeah.
spending.
Right.
And those are the only two options in my view.
And it's interesting because I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the proposal that Scott Beck has been putting out for the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Because it's an interesting way of tying that back.
He's been. I'll tell you. I give kudos to Scott Beck. He came in it's complicated. It's the yield, so a lot of people don't understand. But essentially, it does. His idea is to adjust the yield, which determines
Right, the amount, right.
the amount, and that if you spend above a certain amount, you will be that much more liable, that much more responsible for
Yeah.
that
For the money.
increased spending.
So it sets a floor, basically.
exactly.
Like you get $15,000 a year, and then above that, there's a slope now where
It's a very
And it's a gradual slope.
So even if you're a high spender, like if you're spending $19,000, I think East Montpelier spends $19,000 per pupil. Very little of that excess, that higher amount is paid for by
Yeah.
particular communities that spend that. It's paid for by the whole state,
Yeah.
And-
so this adjustment would make them more responsible for, or
But
responsible for more of that.
that's a conscious vote on their part.
That's
You
right.
get 15, and then
they would
anything
know
above
that,
that.
that
yeah.
they
Yeah.
would be
No.
paying.
Well, and there are very few districts, if you're depending on how you calculate it, there are very few districts that are spending less than $15,000 a
Right,
student.
Yeah.
Right.
But and this is one of the things that some people theorize is driven the increase in property taxes since Act 60 is
sure.
this formula that basically when you spend $1 more, your tax rate only reflects about a 40-cent increase in property tax under Act 68. This proposal would move it more to a one-to-one relationship.
right.
It'd be about a 95% increase or
Just put
95-cent
time on-
increase.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it kind of makes it more painful to spend more.
Yeah.
Basically
Well, there
what
was
it does.
so many ideas
At least
this
there's
year
more skin
batted
in the
around.
game.
There's more
People
skin in
have-
the game.
People have skin in the game.
Yeah.
And that's.
But there
and
were
that's important.
several ideas floating around, income tax, half
So-
income tax, half property, I mean, there was a
It was
lot
there was a
of
hybrid.
discussion.
I will say at the beginning of the session, I had some hope that
do something?
some meaningful reform
Yep.
to the education funding system would come
Yeah.
come to fruition this year. There was certainly a try and an effort on the part of the leadership of the
Right.
House and the leadership of Ways and Means and
Yeah,
members of
I was
Ways and Means,
surprised.
and then and that was good, and it
Yeah.
lasted a couple of months, but then pressures just.
Yeah.
Got too
Well, it
much.
was H9/11,
Yeah.
and
So-
I think they started out in a good spot, but it's kind of this whole thing of you want simplicity in
Yeah.
a tax rate
Right.
system, but you also want equity, and equity is usually complicated to get there. And
Yeah,
at the end
and
of the day,
and the connection of the voters to the budgets just didn't, it kind
Yeah.
of disappeared to a
Well,
large extent.
I was
in
very
the end-
excited,
in
like
the
you
end
were, that they were
product, but-
actually talking
Yeah.
about it. So we're getting there.
Yeah,
someday.
let's hope.
Someday.
Knock on wood.
Anyway.
One of these days. But yeah.
so do you have any predictions for what's going to happen in this special session that's coming up?
Like,
or is it kind
like
of
I said, I think it's all. I just don't know at this point. I don't know if the vetoes will have been, or the bills will have been vetoed by the time. I don't know if veto votes will happen, or the override or sustaining of the vetoes will happen on Wednesday, or if we'll just have the committees get back to work and then come back. So I'm hopeful that those pieces of legislation that didn't make it to the finish line, that those pieces of legislation that will be vetoed or have been vetoed by the governor, that clearly will be sustained by not just Republicans but Democrats as
Right,
well,
right.
and that's both paid family leave and minimum wage.
Right.
I'm hopeful that those will go. I'm hopeful that the governor will veto another bill, S-105, and that will remain. That won't go into effect.
Which
And
one
it's
is
really
that
with
one?
the-
Is that the?
It's a bill that deals with it changes contracts, waivers,
right,
consents, and what
right.
have you. That
Yeah.
that is, in my view, really problematic.
And that
And,
impacts the recreational industry, right? Is
It
that
impacts a lot.
that's
I focused on the impact it would have on
'cause
the
of
outdoor
Stowe.
recreation industry, but it impacts. It has an impact on telecom and utilities
Oh,
because
really?
everybody has these contracts and certain inherent risks that go along with it, or things like that. But certainly, the outdoor recreation industry is a huge part of our economy, and throughout the entire state, not just in Stowe. Certainly not just in
Right,
Multnomah
sure.
County, but from from skiing and snowboarding to mountain biking to
Yeah,
golfing
right.
to fishing to horseback riding, everything. When people participate in those activities, there's an inherent risk, so their contracts are such that
Right.
that that as a participant. And whether you're a nonprofit entity or a for-profit entity, you could be the Special Olympics or the Vermont City Marathon or anything else, or a for-profit, a business that's offering these activities. It will lead to a much wider array of lawsuits and consumer fraud
Wonderful.
claims and fines. And at the same time, we're doing this. We would be the first state to do this. The state of Vermont would be. Meanwhile, Colorado and New Hampshire, states with which we compete for
right.
these outdoor recreation dollars, are actually strengthening their contract and inherent risk laws. strengthening the waiver laws, and we're doing the exact opposite. So I'm very hopeful that that the governor will veto that one as well.
Does this apply to both, activities on public and private lands?
Yeah, it's going to apply to anything, absolutely.
Because a lot of outdoor recreation, like skiing and mountain biking, happen
Yeah.
on
I will
public
say,
lands as
the
opposed
Vermont
to-
Outdoor Recreation Economic Collaborative, of which both the Commissioner of Forest Parks and
right,
Recreation and the Commissioner of Tourism are either co-chairs or members.
Right.
They have expressed very strong opposition to this bill. The Special Olympics has concerns. The Vermont
Oh.
City Marathon has concerns. The Ski Areas Association, obviously, just countless.
I can
of
see
these.
insurance
So-
rates going sky high just
well,
to cover.
liability, and that's one
Yeah,
of the challenges as well,
totally.
higher liability insurance costs.
I'm
That's right.
sorry, because
So-
I know we wanted to ask you what your
Sorry.
impression was of this year, but why don't they get this, Heidi? I mean, when you're articulate.
Well, this one
you
was
tell them-
frankly, this one came up. This one was a surprise to me. I didn't know that it had, it passed the Senate, and I don't think there were any. I don't know why people didn't realize
Right.
what the challenge might be, but when it was the last couple of weeks, it was making its way in the committee, and I know that there was people who reached out to committee members and the
Right.
committee chair, and just to really no avail, unfortunately, and so it was something of which that about which not many representatives knew.
Right.
So
There wasn't
so
much
I'm
coverage in the
hopeful.
media
There wasn't
either.
much coverage in the media, and it's kind of a complicated. It's not sexy. It's not marijuana. It's not
Right.
It's insurance, and no
It's
one wants to talk.
insurance.
No one wants to talk about
destroying our
insurance.
business.
contracts and
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
so I'm hopeful that will happen. But anyway, so the special session, I kind of again got off on a tangent. My apologies.
That's
but
okay.
so I'm hopeful that those kinds of things that we really will just deal with the must-pass bills. That's
Right.
that's what I guess I'm
Right.
hopeful
So
for.
we're not
is the budget and the
anticipating
tax.
any surprise bills at this point.
Well, again, I'm hopeful. I wish
Fingers crossed.
I wish
Yeah.
I could tell you that, but
Yeah.
again, that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping we just really deal with we
I'm
sit down,
envisioning-
get our work done for the year,
And go home.
and go home. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
As long as we don't see carbon tax, we're good.
yeah.
So what's what's your impression of this year in the legislature versus previous years? I know that there's been a lot of tension this year between the administration and the legislature,
Yeah.
more so than I can remember between a governor and the legislature.
Yeah, there was so that's a really actually good question, and that's an interesting that you say that it because last year I think because it was all of their first years
Right.
Right.
in
Sure,
leadership,
and a
so,
lot of new
so you
people.
knew that the bumps and bruises were going
Right.
to be there, like people were still trying to figure
Sure.
out. So this year I think you're right. I think it started it started off pretty quickly that way. I think it was that there's not a the working relationship is strained.
Right.
I think that's
You can see
put it mildly. I think that is the case. I've seen it. I think in the past, this is when the governor, when the legislature actually overrode Governor Douglas's veto
Oh, the budget.
on the budget, and that was a time when things were pretty tense. And then following that, obviously, Governor Douglas really lost a great deal of influence because he was
Right.
he could be overridden.
Right.
So there was so I've seen that tension before, but I didn't. The governor being in the legislature for as long as he was, serving with the people that he's now working with as a legislature, I thought there would be a little bit more cohesiveness. Obviously, they're going to disagree on priorities. They're going to disagree philosophically
Right.
on issues, and hopefully that'll turn around next year. But
Yeah.
I think there is a very strained relationship right
But
now.
I think it's bothering both sides. I don't think
think
it's
so.
just Republicans or.
No,
I think
no.
everybody's unhappy with what's going on.
No, frankly, I will say this. I think the PR or the public relations, the messaging. I think why the Democratic leadership is so frustrated, or part of the reason, is because actually, if you go out there into the world in Vermont, the governor's the governor is winning the message.
Ah.
People really are concerned about taxes
Right.
and cost and
Right.
affordability.
Yeah.
And the governor, that is his message, and that has been his message. So I think you can see that being the case, and the public, the Vermonters really feel that the governor
Right.
is right. I think that has added to the strain. I think the Democrats are I think that's part of the reason they're a little bit more.
We had all of the leaders of the House, progressives, Democrats, and we asked them, what did you hear? This was last year. What did you hear during the campaign? Every one of them said exactly the same thing. Education, cost of education,
Yeah.
property tax. Everybody heard the same thing, but it's not happening.
It's always a little tougher once you get in there.
Yeah.
I mean, you know it,
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
it, you've seen it. It's
Yeah.
it's always a little tougher with different special interests in the building, different things. So sometimes those those things that you've heard outside don't necessarily.
Yeah.
And again, two of those. Again, we're talking about a minimum wage bill, and I have fought for 12 years to ensure growth and
Right.
and
You
wage
have.
growth and job growth and all of the but to artificially increase wages will do more harm,
Right.
in my view, to
I'm
those
so upset
working
by that.
Vermonters
Yeah.
than good, and that's the challenge.
Well, and one of the things I think that's, a lot of the minimum wage studies of the past really are not all that applicable to our current economy, because it is so much easier now to replace a worker with technology
Yeah.
than it ever has been
Right.
in the past.
Yeah.
And the opportunity cost, if you raise the opportunity cost of hiring someone versus replacing them with a machine, which, even service industry jobs, which used to be
Yeah.
safe from automation,
Yeah.
no longer the case. I mean, you see, touchscreen kiosks on every,
Yep.
chain restaurant there is
Yep.
now, and
Yep.
and that's just going to continue. And if you raise the cost of hiring people as opposed to technology,
But we've talked about
you
this,
know.
the individual coming in and getting the $15 an hour overtime. You then have to raise the other people who have been there
Oh, yeah,
2
the
or
upward
3 years,
pressure-
and they're making $15 and
The upward pressure on,
Right,
on
it's
those higher
cost of
higher
pension,
levels. Yep.
healthcare, everything.
Workers'
kicks-
compensation is
yeah,
based on your,
exactly.
as an employer, is based on my payroll.
Yeah,
Everything
it's
goes
not
up.
just
Everything goes
$15 an hour.
Yeah, yep.
It's
I
really
will
not.
say with the minimum wage, it is, so, the proponents of the minimum wage increase, it is to put more money in the pockets of
Right.
those people so they spend more. It is to decrease income inequality, and it is to decrease poverty. These are all very worthy
Yes,
goals.
absolutely.
Right.
Like, I'm good, but none of the three happen. I will happen. It is clear. So first of all, in Vermont, 50% of the households living in poverty in Vermont don't have any W-2 income at all. So they have no wages. So they're on a fixed income like disability or something like that.
And that's not changing.
And so we're not. So is raising a minimum wage the best way to deal with poverty? Will it reduce income inequality? All studies, there is no evidence. According to our labor economist, he tried and tried to the nth degree to find evidence that it will reduce income inequality, and he just says it won't. There's no evidence to support that it will.
Wow.
And putting more money in the pockets, if you arbitrarily, one of the biggest cost of goods and services is the cost of labor. If you increase the cost of labor,
Yep.
those goods and services are going to
up.
go up. And I will say, and those living in poverty who don't have wage income are living, and those are seniors and disabled. I will say that.
And they're
Those are
gonna get
mostly
hurt.
seniors and disabled, and their cost of living
Right, wonderful.
will increase. And so I don't think this is the best way to deal with those three issues. I think we do need to institute policies to do that, but I think it's really more about encouraging and rewarding growth. But anyway, so that's
So Heidi, I was thinking, I was realizing you're in the House Committee on General Housing and Military
Yeah.
Affairs. And I don't think we've ever had anyone on the show from that committee. And I thought if we could take 15 minutes and talk about your role on we've never done that, your role on the committee. What does it mean to sit in a committee? You've got some good members on that committee. I checked them out.
It's an interesting committee.
Yes, it is.
It's the
I'm being
committee,
good.
yes, it's the interesting committee,
It's an
yes.
interesting
So,
committee.
Yeah.
could you talk about that committee? What kind of bills get sent
So
your
we-
way from the speaker?
So I'll just give the liquor bills. Liquor legislation is ours. We have the jurisdiction over the Department of Liquor and Law, and now, well, possibly. Actually, I don't even know if that went through. But
didn't.
the lottery.
They're hoping it does.
We have military. We have jurisdiction over military issues, so the Vermont National Guard and other
Right.
things like that. And we do a lot of labor law or labor legislation. That can run the gamut. Paid family leave, minimum wage were bills that came out of our committee.
You've had your
this
hands
year.
full this year. You had some great bills in there because you passed the National Guard Education Assistance Program, which I thought was excellent.
Actually, we did that. Yeah, so we did that. I want to say we passed it last year, and it went to appropriations, but
Oh,
it never
my
got. But that's okay. So yeah, it was. We have a real recruitment challenge with
Right.
our Vermont National Guard and our Vermont General Cray has really been trying to deal with it. They really try to recruit a certain number of non-prior service personnel and to be Guard members. And their goal in the past, I think it's even higher now, but their goal in the past was about 300 per year. The previous 4 years it just keeps decreasing. 200 and something, 250
I didn't
to
realize that.
like 225, and so we have a real recruitment problem. And one of the things that we think can help address that recruitment problem is to offer free tuition,
That's
because
great.
all of our surrounding states do that already, and so people are more inclined to go to New Hampshire National Guard or New York National Guard. So this is what we wanted to do that. We passed that bill last year. Went to appropriations. It didn't end up again making it across the finish line last year, but this year. We passed it in that the bill itself didn't pass, but as is the case sometimes, the money was put in the budget, the language was put in the budget, and it passed the House. The Senate took it out, but in conference it was put back in, and it's actually an improvement in my view over what we passed. So I'm not quite sure how that happened, except General Cray is very
Excellent.
happy.
convincing.
They want to
Yeah.
keep him happy.
It will offer free tuition at the rate of Northern Vermont University, which is the new university, Linden State
Oh, yes,
College and
right, of
Johnson
course,
State
right.
College. So it'll offer that reimbursement, that tuition for any college, which will cover most of the state colleges.
Good.
It will cover all of the tuition for UVM, and
Oh,
it includes the amount for Northern Vermont University to go to private schools, so they can use that to go to Champlain or Norwich.
Awesome.
A lot of these Guard members really go to Norwich.
Yeah.
Another large portion also go to Champlain. Champlain, for example, is
bill.
the only law enforcement, the one that offers a law enforcement.
Thought they were going to name
education,
that
so-
Lyndon B. Johnson merger school. How could you merge Lyndon and
yeah.
Johnson? Let me see.
Yeah.
So just kidding.
So that's in the budget is something we're working on, but that
right.
was
That's a
agreed
good bill.
upon. So that was I think that's a positive development, and I think that'll help with our recruitment,
Definitely.
which would be
Well,
great.
that's huge. I mean, because I'm a Norwich grad,
Oh,
and
yeah.
and there's a lot of people there that were there for scholarships.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it definitely motivates people.
Yeah,
There's
it's
no question.
huge. It's huge. It's really. I
great.
think it's been a long time coming. So that was it last year? I think we even tried it the year before, the session before.
Really? It
But
didn't
I wasn't
go
in that
through.
committee at the time. But I think.
Oh,
the
you're
leg-
new to this committee?
Oh yes, I've been on several committees.
You're on
I'm
the-
sort of.
They keep
I'm the
moving you
most.
around.
I'm the most versatile
Oh, yeah?
legislator. They're just like, either that or it's the chair, whoever picks the shortest straw.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
I-
absolutely.
But
Oh,
this year,
man.
Heidi, that's
So-
been a very active committee. You've been really
It's-
involved in some serious issues. You've got ethics on there too. See
There's a whole
that?
bunch of
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you were on Ways and Means at one point, right?
No, I've never been on Ways and Means. I've been on transportation, on judiciary, on economic development, and now general.
Oh, I remember from
So,
economic
Yeah,
development.
I
Yeah.
spent a long time on economic
Yeah.
development, but the other bill that I think was a really positive one that I helped lead. I was a co-sponsor of and helped lead was the beer franchise bill. which
Oh, we
didn't
like
get
beer
a-
here.
I was
I
gonna
know.
say we have to talk about craft beer at some
Exactly.
point in the show.
And it has been, these franchise laws with distributors and who can sell,
Right.
That was actually a really interesting bill.
It
I
was
followed that a little bit. and
It was a fascinating. I
really-
learned so much
yeah.
over this, over how that whole thing. So we ended up, make a long story short, what we wanted to do was make it. We have a burgeoning and a very
Oh, it's awesome
of
what's
this
happening.
craft brew industry
Right.
in Vermont, and we just wanted to be able to help them better able to access the market and
We've
better
got a
able to get
promise
their
from the
product out to the
Vermont
market.
Craft Brewers Association to
Yeah.
come on the show.
Oh, good.
Because there was a while there, every show, somehow,
beer,
microbrews
yeah.
came up.
Somehow,
Somehow.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
craft beer came up at some
Yeah.
point.
Yeah,
But
so
this,
that was a lot of negotiations between the distributors and the craft brewers.
right, it was
and,
between the distributors and the brewers.
Right,
yeah.
and so we have, and it's the first change in our franchise laws of any
That's great.
significance
That's
for a
great.
long time, and I think it'll help. It'll help our small breweries get their product out
Well,
to
there
market
was a change
little
though, a
better.
couple of years ago about allowing wine to be
Yeah.
delivered to, that was a big one for my house.
That's
So
right. Yeah,
We like that one.
Yep. So
No more brown paper bags.
Right.
You could actually
That's
say you
true.
were taking.
That's true. Yep, that's true.
And you also, aside from the bills that you worked on in committee, you also co-signed on a number of bills,
Mm-hmm.
which you typically you do. I think your name is on like half the bills.
No, well,
I don't know.
she's very
Maybe not half,
selective.
but quite a
But
bit.
yeah.
And just a couple of them. There were a couple that were pretty popular this year, like removing taxes from Social Security benefits.
Yay, Heidi.
Ethics
Yeah.
committee.
Yeah.
You've been on that for several years. You've
Yep.
had bills introduced. And then independent contractors. Was
Yeah.
another
Is
one.
that ever going to get solved? Heidi?
Independent contractors, it kind of is, although
Yeah.
it didn't require
It
legislation.
was a Supreme Court decision.
It was a unanimous Supreme Court decision on unemployment insurance, and they
They
decided
just- Yeah, that's right.
that it was a case that but their decision was basically that as an LLC or a corporation, you cannot be considered an employee.
Good.
For purposes of UI, and the Department of Labor then saw that and read the decision and really analyzed the decision through its legal, what the justices spoke about, and every argument with regard to UI applied to workers'
Right,
compensation.
right.
So there's a guideline document.
So
a
the
guideline
ABC
document
thing is gone, right?
as far as when if you're an LLC or a corporation, it's just
Yeah.
you cannot you can't be considered a.
I like it.
So it's a bright line, which is what they needed.
Well, it's a
Yeah.
conscious statement by the person.
That
I
you-
want to be independent.
yeah.
I don't want to be an employee,
Sure.
so why not let
yeah, it's a
them?
pretty
Yeah.
conscious step if you're forming an LLC.
Yeah, exactly.
It's pretty.
Yeah. So right now, I think, we're really sort of just watching things to see how it's going.
That's
But in
great.
my view, it seems I haven't heard much in terms of anything in terms
That's
of negative consequences for these decisions and the guidance document. It was a guidance document that came from the Department of
Right.
Labor that said this also applies to workers' comp. So, I think.
Well, we had a
Let it
guest
go.
on the show who went to Champlain College. Remember the knitters versus the Department of Labor?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that was me.
Yeah,
So
it was?
Yeah. So they studied that case in their independent contractor class, and
Oh, they
and
did?
She called me up hysterical.
That's funny.
But we won, so that was
That's
good.
funny. Yeah, that was
That's all
funny.
that matters, right?
Yeah,
That's all
yeah,
that
yeah.
matters. Did we
Right,
win?
right, right.
So,
That's funny.
So, are there any other bills that you co-sponsored or you saw that were really interesting? That kind of.
So when I consider the whole biennium, there's rather than just this past year, but
Right.
what we were able to do, I think there was movement. I think, and I'm happy about that. Again, I'm going to stress the fact that we for 2 years have passed budgets that haven't relied on increased
Right.
or new taxes and fees. That's huge. That is unheard of. I think the ethics, you worked on the
Right.
ethics legislation and the
Too long.
creation of an ethics commission. Again, that's not sexy either. It's not, but I always.
people
I had
are
been-
interested in it, though.
I had been,
Yeah.
fighting for something for a long
Right.
time ever since some of these, it just wasn't something I'd thought about before certain things had occurred. And then I thought, well, this is just
Yeah.
Yeah.
not appropriate. It just gives the
It's
wrong
almost
perception.
more
So-
obvious on the local level,
Yeah.
where you've got a guy on the planning commission that owns half the town. I mean,
Yeah,
it's just,
yeah.
it's conflict of interest sort of things, and whether they should.
But I think it
speak
was
up.
just as, I think it's just as prevalent. I
Yeah,
mean,
in the
and I think,
legislature.
I think that needs to be, at
I
least
agree.
the transparency needs to be there, the acknowledgement and recognition needs to be there. So I'm proud that that happened. I'm proud of the housing. We did that housing,
Yes,
that
that was
came out of
great.
our committee. We do housing as well. But that it ended up being a $37 million housing bond because of the market we were able to sell it out in. And I think that will, I think it's going to take some time to see what
Is that
comes to fruition.
low income, middle income?
It's not. It actually goes up to you.
Oh, good.
Right, because the problem is, I mean, it's not just low income we need. We
Yep,
need
yep,
actually
yep.
those other rungs on the ladder that
We
we're
hear
really
that
missing.
from businesses who are trying to attract
Recruit.
people
Yeah.
from outside.
Really
that
a
there's
challenge.
no place to live.
So, so I think that will help, and it allows for certain. So, for example, part of our housing last year as well was in designated downtowns or village centers. If you have priority housing that you're developing,
Right.
you don't have to go through Act 250. You know, I mean,
That's
so
huge.
those kinds of things are could really benefit. You know, our stock, our housing
Yep.
stock, and increase our housing stock. It's still going to take some time, and I will say that I think we absolutely. I mean, we cannot lay up. I believe we need to do much more in terms of regulatory reform
Right.
to encourage
Yeah.
more development.
Have
I
no
mean, I've-
argument here in this
Well,
show.
I mean, the housing bond, I can tell some of the projects
Yeah.
were already starting to move.
Yeah.
But just in the Burlington area, there's at least 3 large-scale projects in
And
the
then,
Burlington area.
yeah,
that are-
right. And one of the challenges actually with it was we don't want all this going to Chittenden County, which is why they set it up for this 3-year rollout.
Oh, great.
And they're trying to get over. They unfortunately, in my opinion, we have yet to have an application from Lamoille County,
Oh.
where I am, unfortunately. But there are several other projects happening around the state, which is great because I think that's one of the concerns because Chittenden County is such. I mean, it is growing and they need the housing, but we also want to make sure it goes around. So
Right.
that's why it was
Yeah.
sort of rolled out in
And-
over 3 years.
And if you look county by county, I mean, Chittenden County does have the most, even per capita, the most available jobs. But it's interesting because if you look back at the last 10 years, Lamoille County is actually the fastest
Yeah.
growing economically.
That's true. That's
Yeah.
true.
And
Actually,
which is
yeah,
kinda
we
Who
have
is
interesting.
your counterpart? Richie
manufacturers.
Westman's the only other.
He's the senator. Yeah,
so
we
you
have a
have
single
just
senator.
you and
Yeah.
Richie.
Yes.
I think a
So-
lot of that growth's been in Morrisville. but,
Yeah,
you know.
there's a big manufacturing, MSI, Concept 2, you know, all of those. Those
Yeah.
are
That's great.
you know, butter.
We won't tell.
Milk Farms, I forget, but yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot happening in Morrisville.
Yeah, a lot
and that's
happening.
and that's really positive. Yeah.
Yeah, that town's
Can you
changed
talk
a
a
lot.
little bit about clean water? And that didn't end so well this year.
No, it was really frustrating actually this year. You know, there was a committee that came up with different ideas on how to fund it. I think in general the process. I think the bottom line is. We need to figure out a process and a way in which to figure out who is going to be responsible for what when it
Right.
comes to cleanup.
Right.
Municipalities need to have a hand in this. The agriculture community needs to have a hand in this, and so many others. But
Right.
but the state needs to have a
Right.
hand in this. But the actual how it's going to be allocated, the responsibilities allocated, is really the biggest challenge.
Yep.
And then second only to, okay, then how are we going to pay? How is
Right.
that allocation
So
going
what
to be paid
happened to
for?
the $2 per room?
Well, and that's,
So the
that's where it
$2
kinda
went-
hit,
Yeah, so that was the original proposal, or the one
Not that I agree with it, but-
Representative Dean. Well, and I would argue that shouldn't be where it. I mean,
No.
you can't have the tourism industry
Right.
I
being
agree
the
with
sole carrying
Funder.
the
Right.
burden
That's
of
a little
clean
bit
water.
better than the coffee industry. though,
Yes, it
taking the-
so they
Tax
did
on
change
coffee.
it to a rooms and meals tax increase, which again hits the tourism community. In my view, and I've Cynthia Browning and I are pretty simpatico on this, I think, and others. When I talk to people, I think I agree. I think if we can figure out the way to allocate the responsibility and also see, I think we can do this. We will need funding,
Right.
and we do need to
But Heidi,
ensure that Vermonters understand we need funding. In my view, it needs to have a nexus to water, though. It
Right.
has to have a nexus. And so I would like to see what the impact of, the impervious surface fees,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
and a fee on impervious
Because
surfaces.
that does have a nexus back
Yes,
to water
It has a
quality.
nexus
Right.
to water, and I know it's complicated for the tax department to collect it because they don't have any, that they argue it would cost all this money to put in. But from what I understand, the Agency of Natural Resources already collects an impervious surface fee,
Oh,
so
I don't,
I don't
is
know
that
why we
right?
can't
Is
just.
that true? I
I don't know,
that.
that's what I understand, I
I'll have
should have
to
waited, but
check that.
that's, so I think we should be able to do something that
I
makes
think they have
sense.
a permitting fee.
Yeah.
They definitely have a permitting fee. I'm not sure if they
that's-
have an
Maybe
ongoing.
it's not a fee from impervious surfaces, but they know what the impervious
Oh,
surface
that's
is.
We'll
making
maybe.
sure,
check that
yeah.
out.
Yeah,
So
hopefully.
report on it, because that's important.
Because we did have the tax commissioner on,
Yeah.
and we were talking a little bit about that.
Okay, yeah,
'Cause
I would
it's
be
This is
interested.
such a huge problem. We have to start now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no,
Do
and
something.
and we do have to identify. We
Yep.
do have to. I'm in complete agreement,
Yeah.
but I would say putting the burden solely on tourists
Right.
and the tourism
And the
industry
landowners
is the
around
wrong
the
thing to
lakes.
do.
I think that's, I have a problem with that. Just because you happen to live there. I think there's such an economic impact of Lake Champlain. I think we're all in this mess.
I think so. I think it's harder. I think that's harder to sell when you're
Well,
down in Bennington,
Right.
Right.
and you know, and the Battenkill River is so clean.
Yeah, well,
And then they'll say, you know
Yeah.
what? I don't.
I don't want to
You
do
know,
this.
you guys are ones ruining the water
Yeah.
up there. We're
Yeah.
keeping ours clean. So I think,
That's
but
true.
but that said, I mean, I don't have an answer to it, but I do think it is a challenge, and I do think we need to agree on a funding source. But I believe it needs to have nexus to water. That's
agree
my.
with you.
Yeah,
Good
and that's
answer.
and that's a
mine.
fair assessment.
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
you know, quite honestly, I think potentially there's no better plan out there that I've seen other than the treasurer's plan in terms of how do you execute on something like this.
Yeah, on
and-
her funding plan or
Her
the
funding plan.
options. Yeah.
And I don't think anyone else has put out a more comprehensive plan at this
Yeah.
point. And you know, maybe you tweak it a little bit, maybe you figure out how to make it
I'll
more.
be interested. Part of 260 that ended up, so 260 is going into law, which will, again, part of what I liked about the bill was that it is going to come up with a plan on how to allocate
Right.
these
Right.
responsibilities.
Yeah.
And that is important to me, I think. But it also, again, there's going to be another offering of funding
Yeah.
options, I
So-
think.
Right,
that
because they took the
results
funding
from
pieces
260
out of it.
and put in, yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to, tell me, we have about 11 minutes left, but
Yeah.
if there's a hang-up with, if there's, the budget's overridden, that means the state doesn't have a budget. That means or June 30th, there is no money.
You mean if the budget
We don't
is
have a
sustained?
continuing resolution.
You
Yes,
mean if
I'm
the
sorry.
budget is,
Right.
the budget veto is
sustained.
sustained?
Right.
Yeah, no, they would,
So they
they
have
would
to
have
do
to, we'll
something.
have to vote on something before July 1. Yeah, we
Right.
have to put something into
But
place for July 1.
fortunately, there's June.
I'm sorry?
There's the month of June, so
It's
there's.
true. I mean, again, I'm hopeful. I don't think, I mean, I think right now, it is certainly still seems to be a stalemate.
Right.
There doesn't seem to be much movement. I'm hopeful that changes.
Because all it would take would be a continuing resolution
We-
that would give X bucks to keep going.
Yeah, we've never, as
Never
far as
done that.
we've never done that, and we did, Representative Turner did offer an amendment to allow for a continuing
Right,
resolution, but
it
that
didn't-
failed.
It failed.
But there's no reason, I mean, I supported that just as a, you know, a backstop, but I wouldn't support, I think it's important to just get the job done.
Get the
You know,
budget done.
Come on, this
Right.
is Vermont.
It
We don't need-
seems like, you know, Governor Scott is in danger of being in a similar situation to Governor Douglas in terms of having a budget that gets a veto that gets overridden.
There certainly was a lot of support for the budget among Republicans as it stood because in general it is a good budget. It doesn't increase spending a lot. There is the $30 million that he'd like to use for the property tax buy down for this year. I can't tell you whether or not it will be overridden. If it is, though, I don't think he's in the same boat as Governor Douglas, because Governor Douglas, that was a clear indication of he doesn't have the support.
Yeah,
We've
yeah.
already sustained a veto on S-103.
Right.
We will sustain a veto
On the tax bill.
most
Yeah, right.
everything else, I suspect.
Right.
We do have the numbers to sustain the vetoes. It will depend, though, his strength next year will depend, though, on the election in November.
Yeah, right.
Because we have a very, very thin margin
Right.
Right.
of being able to
You
ensure
have
that
3
he has
votes.
influence, basically.
Yeah.
It's basically 3 votes that
And
you
there were,
need.
So we need to
more
make sure that
Republicans
there
than
are-
3 that voted for the
Oh,
budget.
yeah.
Oh, yeah,
It
they're
was
all,
like
And it was,
17 that voted
Yeah,
against
right.
it, something
I
like
think
that.
like 14.
14, yeah.
So-
So it's like,
And
you know,
so, at the same time, though, it's, you got to think about where, your question about his influence, and he's had a really good influence on our overall budget and
Right.
state spending and economy over the last 2 years. So I don't want to sacrifice that.
Right.
And if there's a way to have a compromise, that's,
so
to
there,
come
was
to
there a
co-
fee
some-
bill this year or not? No, because there wasn't last year either,
No.
so kudos. That alone is a
Yeah.
few bucks, that
Yeah,
fee
no
bill
one-
drives me crazy.
no one wants to deal with a fee bill.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right, exactly.
But
So-
go
it
ahead.
does seem like the situation does put the legislative leaders in a stronger bargaining position because they know that they probably have the votes. If push came to shove, they probably have the votes. And that's kind of a tough bargaining position.
Again,
for the
I don't,
governor.
I
Oh,
wouldn't
she's
necessarily,
thinking.
no, it's just, we haven't been put in, we haven't actually, and nor have we, I don't know how others feel about it, where they are. I don't know where other people are. There might be, like I said, the inclination to say, you know what, he has had a very good impact on our spending and our budgets throughout 2 years. We want to make sure that influence remains, so we're going to support him in the veto of the budget, even though we think the budget was a good one, but if there's a way.
Right,
So
right.
there might very well be that
Just to make a
that
statement.
conscious effort
Yeah.
to make sure that we say, you know what, Governor, we got your back.
That's great.
So,
I would vote for that one.
so
But we had David Coates on the show a couple of weeks ago. And I
pensions.
have, oh my God. Well, that's what this 30 million is. Does
I
it go to
know.
the pension?
That's
Do you
the
know,
other
he
thing.
told us, and I put it on Facebook, I have had a diatribe of people from the union, I mean, it just goes on and on and on. He said, total liability, teachers and state, including healthcare, 4.5 billion.
Yeah.
Staggering.
Yeah.
So without a plan, I don't know what 30 million will do one way or the other.
That's actually that's a great point, because that's the other thing. We can put this in, and over the course of 20 years, you save 100 million in the interest payments.
Right.
Over the, that's a considerable sum, but it's still not, it's not
No.
too much when you consider our total, in this particular case, the teacher's pension is 1.2 billion, and then teachers' health care is beyond that.
Right.
And state, but it doesn't, so it's not that, that impactful. Without a
you need a
reform
plan,
plan, though, it's sort of just, okay, here you go. But I think it needs to go hand in hand
Yeah.
with a reform plan. And David Coates is,
He's
he
gave
has
us
been
some
preaching
great
to this
suggestions.
he's very good. We've communicated a number of times as well on this over the years and tried to figure out how we might be able to. And I know he's been working with the treasurer, but I think they're
Well,
he
Beth
would like to
doesn't-
do different.
Beth really believes where the VSEA is.
Yeah, so the whole, but he's gonna still. I think he's still plugging away.
He is. He's been doing this
He doesn't
since
give up.
2008.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that's what
he's
I
got it
remember.
down.
Yeah.
So Heidi, we have
exactly.
4 minutes left, and I wanted to end on a local note.
Yeah.
I don't know if other towns have done this, but you put in a charter change that gave Stowe the flexibility of calling your annual meeting on a Saturday, Sunday, Monday, just to see when people will show up the most.
Yeah,
What a
we
cool
wanted.
idea.
The town had gone through the last, probably started about 5 years ago, really trying to see
Right, we all are.
how we might be able to have better representation, more representation at town meeting. We have always had our meetings on Tuesdays, 8 a.m. The school district and town meeting in the town meeting, and a number of years ago, our school budget went to Australian ballot, but our town budget is still
That's interesting
very
that you
much
did that.
on the town meeting floor. But over the course of the years, and it was the number of people to attend was kept decreasing. So
Right.
a few years ago we came anyway. So there were a few ideas, to make sure. Regardless, there were a few ideas, and then this last one was voted on by the town last year, and it was put by the select board forward that said, so Tuesday, the second. Is it the second Tuesday?
Second Tuesday.
Second
Right.
Tuesday in March is town meeting. We'd like to have the flexibility to call it
Right.
instead of Tuesday, possibly Saturday, Sunday, or Monday before that.
I think that's a great
and,
idea.
We haven't used it yet, but we have that, and so we
And
thought
the
about
school
doing it
would
on
go
Saturdays.
along with you on that mostly, wouldn't
Yes,
they?
yes, it would be a joint decision because
Yeah.
that's the time when the school budget goes through, the school board goes through their things, even though their budget isn't voted on, people can ask questions of
What
the
do you
different
do in your
articles.
town, Ben? Is it,
In Burlington,
Yeah.
they do Australian ballot, but they have an informational meeting Monday night.
yeah, but do
So-
you know now, I was telling Heidi before the show, there is a law that allows you to discuss things at town meeting, like the budget.
That are on the Australian
That are on
ballot.
the Australian
That's,
ballot.
I misunderstood what you said, but yeah, that's true. I
Right,
forgot about
yeah.
that. Yep.
So we don't even have hardly anybody showing up at the pre-town meeting because you can ask on the Australian ballot.
course.
On,
Yeah.
on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Which makes
I miss
sense.
it, so I miss
Well,
town meeting.
and
I
the town
do.
did a survey on this, didn't they? There was a group. I know that some people who
right.
were involved with it. and
Yeah.
they did a survey
Yeah,
of
Mary
people in town.
Evslin and David
man.
Jakewell were sort of the leads, I think, on it. And there was a group of volunteers that came together to try to figure out. I forgot about that. That's
How
right.
to increase participation.
How to increase participation, and some of it was, offer childcare, to try to encourage people to come.
Good lunch, that's what does it
Good
to
lunch,
us.
yeah.
So a number of things came up. That's right. This was one of them, is to have the ability. Let's see what days might work
That's great.
best. So
So before we close, I want to congratulate Heidi. She has one of the best, truly the best informational emails, and I tell everybody to sign
Oh,
on.
thanks,
How
yeah.
could they sign on to get your email?
first of all, they can go to my website and they can sign up right there. So it's HeidiScheuermann.com. It is an outdated website. I'm updating it, but this newsletter sign up is still there. They can email me. You can find my email on the legislative website, and I'll be happy to put you on it.
It's great.
And yeah, thank you. I enjoyed doing it. I realized during my first year that I learn by writing. I have to
Well, you are
write
an
things out,
excellent
and that's how I process it and remember
Yeah.
it. And so I decided at one point, I said, well, geez, if I'm writing all this, I should
Share it.
get it out
Yeah,
to people.
share it with
people,
And so that's how it started. And
That's great.
Thank you.
No,
Yeah,
kudos,
thank you
because
very much.
I read it all the time.
Thank you.
And Donahue does a good one. There's a couple
Yeah.
of people around that really
Yeah.
spend the time. Guy Page, of course, has his
Yep.
when
Yep.
we've had Guy on the show. Heidi, thank you very
Hey, thank
much.
you
I
for
hope we
having me.
covered
It
it
was
all.
great.
We'll be watching.
It's
so
good.
much.
Yeah,
Thank you all
very
for
much.
tuning in. We'll see you next week. And in the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites.